Scorpio is not just beginning a new cycle, it is going through a reactivation portal. There is something happening at layers so deep that few have the language to translate it. When the waxing moon meets the direct vibration of Aries, as it does this January 14th, it provokes an unexpected movement, a silent call to come out of emotional hiding and return to the surface with new awareness. This cycle does not speak of a new beginning in the common sense of the word. It speaks of something more visceral, of what pulses behind the pain, of the strength that is born from silence, of the spiritual memory that only Scorpio carries. Astrologically, this phase activates not only instinct, but the energetic memory of the sign. According to spiritual astrology, this planetary configuration awakens fixed signs more intensely, but in Scorpio, this generates a type of ancestral restlessness, a knot in the center of the chest, a subtle presence that does not frighten, but summons. And this call does not come to those who expect ready-made answers. It presents itself as an inner call to identify one's own origin, one's own motive, one's own cycle. Many Scorpios report a different urgency on these days, not to do it, but to understand it. It's as if something internal asked for external silence, as if the soul whispers, "Now do you listen, or do you keep repeating?" This new cycle marks the beginning of 3 distinct phases, and each of them has a kind of symbolic password that only the most attentive Scorpios will recognize. From now on, let's decode these 3 steps based on astrology and spirituality. And throughout this video, you can discover why this specific phase, and not another, has everything to do with your true role in this plan. If you feel like something inside you is moving, even if externally everything seems the same, this content was created with precision to reach you. Astrology, when taken seriously, does not deliver ready-made answers. It delivers keys. And each phase that we are going to explore now carries one of these keys for those born under the energy of Scorpio, or carry this archetype in important points on the map. Therefore, do not go through this video as if you were just consuming more information. This here is a symbolic mirror, and the more attention you give it, the more it reveals. Comment below if you have noticed subtle changes in the last few days, perhaps in your dreams, in your emotions, or in the way you have reacted to silence. Your experience can help other people recognize themselves in this same process, and this strengthens the community connection that is forming here. Also, leave a like if this topic resonates with what you have experienced. The algorithm understands, but more than that, your interaction vibrates like a signal, and if you're not already subscribed, know that the next videos will delve even deeper into this spiritual journey, with specific revelations for each sign and each phase of the sky. Subscribing is not a favor to the channel. It is a conscious pact with your own awakening process. With each new piece of content, more pieces of the puzzle reveal themselves, and this sequence that begins today with Scorpio will guide the next steps for those who are ready to understand why some souls carry more than stories. They carry codes. Let's go to the first phase. Scorpio does not follow predictable paths. He digs, observes, remains silent, and dives where others hesitate. And that is exactly why in the first phase of this new cycle, the universe does not offer comfort, but tension. A creative, transformative, almost primitive tension, as if every fiber of the Scorpio being was being pulled between 2 poles, the instinct to protect oneself and the call to expand. This is one of those astrological moments when planetary energy does not manifest itself in a subtle way. The crescent moon under the vibration of Aries, combined with the intensity of the fixed signs, mainly Scorpio, activates an internal territory where there is no longer room for emotional masks. It is the beginning of a journey that requires spiritual courage, but not in the sense of fighting, in the sense of remaining whole, even when everything invites withdrawal. Spiritual astrology shows us that this point in the cycle awakens something very specific in Scorpio, the dilemma between self-preservation and the fulfillment of a greater mission. We are not talking about a mission as an external script, but a kind of invisible contract that Scorpio has carried since before birth, something that pulses whenever he tries to ignore its transformative power. At this stage of the cycle, it is common for Scorpios to report feelings of pressure in the body, emotional insomnia, memories of the past that resurface without context, and even impulses to isolate themselves. This is not failure, It is a sign that the sign's energy field is trying to reorganize itself to align instinct with consciousness. While the primitive impulse says, silence, protect yourself, hide, there is another Vyas, deeper, older, saying, it's time to show the world what you learned in the dark. According to esoteric astrology, Scorpio carries an energy of initiation that is not always revealed in rituals or grandiose moments. Sometimes it happens in tense silence, in internal decisions that no one sees, in small symbolic deaths that prepare the ground for something bigger. This first phase represents exactly that, the tension between what was and what is about to be born, between the fear of exposing oneself and the urgency of fulfilling a spiritual function in the collective. And here's a detail. This function is not something that comes from outside. It does not depend on titles, positions, or approvals. It is internal, energetic, linked to the field of influence that Scorpio exerts just by existing authentically. When connected to your axis, this sign is capable of moving emotional waters around you. But when he hides out of fear, that same intensity turns against him, generating confusion, rigidity, and a feeling of stagnation. Therefore, this phase of the cycle requires a radical listening stance. It's a time when Scorpio needs to stop waiting for external signs and start recognizing the internal signs that have been building up for weeks. Small irritations, unexplained discomforts, that inexplicable desire to change everything. These are clear symptoms that the soul wants to move even if the ego still wants to protect itself. Traditional astrology recognizes Scorpio as a fixed sign with an intense and deep nature. But spiritual astrology goes further. It understands that this fixity is only useful when used as a basis for transformation and not as an emotional prison. This is where many Scorpios get stuck. They confuse loyalty to pain with identity. They think that holding wounds makes them stronger. But the new cycle invites liberation, not containment. Healing only happens when the shield is left aside and the energy begins to circulate again. In this first stage, there is a kind of subtle test. The universe does not oblige, but invites. And this invitation comes in the form of discomfort, not the one that hurts, but the one that pokes, which says, are you still living from your wound, or are you ready to live from your strength? The difference between a wounded Scorpio and an awakened Scorpio is not the absence of pain, but what he does with it. The first hides, collects sorrows, and closes doors. The second transforms pain into language, into wisdom, into a healing presence. This is the choice that presents itself now, between repeating old patterns or beginning a new spiral of consciousness. And make no mistake, this choice doesn't need to be rushed, but it does need presence. The energy of Pluto, ruler of Scorpio, never works by the clock. It acts in layers, works in depth, activates the invisible. Therefore, if you are feeling that this cycle is stirring emotions that you thought were already resolved, this is not a setback. It's deepening, and in this dive, it is common to find parts of yourself that still need to be welcomed before they become strength. As this first phase unfolds, there is a realignment happening between your emotional body and your spiritual field. It is as if the universe is clearing the internal channels so that the next phase arrives with clarity. And this cleaning is not always pleasant, but it is necessary. You may feel a greater desire to be alone, to sleep more, to talk less. Trust these impulses. They are not escape, they are recalibration. They are the silent way that the soul has to prepare for the crossing. This is the time to honor the conflict without rushing to resolve it. The cycle doesn't require you to have all the answers. It just asks that you be willing to listen more deeply. And for that, silence is not absence. It is a fertile space. As the moon continues to grow, pushing the internal waters of the zodiac upwards, Scorpio is being called to do the same, rise. But this elevation is not social, it is vibrational. It's an elevation of perspective, to look at your own shadows without judgment, and realize that every pain ever carried can be recycled into vision, compassion, and purpose. And this doesn't happen from the outside in. The Scorpio transformation begins when pain stops being a secret and becomes a service. At this exact point, in the cycle, everything that is not aligned starts to cause discomfort. Relationships, habits, mental patterns, things that previously seemed bearable now become unsustainable. And this dissatisfaction is not a mistake. It is the spiritual body asking for space to breathe, to reorganize itself, to align itself with what really matters. And that takes courage. Not the courage to react, but to sustain the process until clarity comes. So, if you are going through this phase with strangeness, with mixed feelings, with moments of doubt, know that you are in the right place. Confusion is part of the path when we are coming out of an anti-go way of operating to something more truthful. And this transition needs pause, care, extra attention. There is a moment when time stops being linear and begins to behave like a mirror, reflecting not the now, but that which has been silenced, forgotten, or buried deep within the soul. The second phase of the Scorpio cycle begins exactly at this threshold, where the present becomes contaminated with echoes of the past. It is not something visible. There is no specific event that signals the transition, but there is an internal recognition. Something starts to repeat itself. Situations, emotions, faces, phrases, reactions, as if reality was reenacting what you already believed you had overcome. When astrology points to the conjunction between the moon and Pluto, especially for those who carry Scorpio in a dominant way in their chart, it is talking about a kind of emotional reset. But unlike what many imagine, this restart does not have the freshness of the new. It has the density of the unresolved. What returns at this stage is not an ordinary memory. It is an energetic impression, an emotional trauma that was never properly integrated, a cycle that was left unfinished, a pain that was managed but not given new meaning. Spirituality shows us that Scorpio carries a guardian nature between worlds, a sign that moves between light and shadow, between end and beginning, between death and rebirth. And it is in this intermediate phase that this transit manifests itself most intensely. The Scorpio soul, already pressured by the movement of the first stage, is now placed in front of its own mirrors. Not to suffer, not to regress, but to decide. Yes, because this phase is not punitive. She is pedagogical. She teaches by repetition, but only if the Scorpio is aware of it. The symptoms of this stage are almost always confused, with emotional relapses, dreams that seem more real than waking life, memories that emerge from nowhere, words that activate old triggers, unexpected encounters with people from the past, or situations that seem to echo patterns from other times. However, there is a crucial difference here. At this stage, the soul is more present, and when the soul is awakened, it has the power to react differently. According to karmic astrology, this return of the past has a clear reason. You are ready to end the cycle, but you cannot do so without awareness. Everything that was left open in the emotional field comes back to be looked at with more mature eyes. Life brings back not what you want, but what still needs clarity. And Scorpio, being the sign of the emotional underworld, is the one who most feels this reactivation as an internal pressure, as if something was asking for passage, not to relive the suffering, but to transcend the identity that was formed from it. This is a moment where old, spiritual pacts, those you made with yourself without realizing it, reveal themselves. Phrases like, "I will never trust again," "I don't need anyone," "better alone than hurt," are silent agreements that create internal barriers. And now, these barriers are beginning to crack, not because someone is trying to invade them, but because your own soul is demanding more space to move, to evolve, to live at another level of consciousness. Plutonian energy, which rules Scorpio, never acts superficially. She drags, she goes down, she confronts, but at the same time it offers power, the kind of power that can't be bought or taught, but accessed when you cross what seemed insurmountable. It is at this point in the cycle that many people withdraw. They think they are regressing when in fact they are just being called to close a cycle with lucidity. There are pains that are only healed when looked at head-on, without the filter of defense or denial. It is not uncommon for you to feel your energy at its lowest during this period. Not because of weakness, but because of internal redistribution. Many things are being reorganized. Old memories that still consumed vital energy are being processed. And for this to happen, the spiritual body needs to silence some areas. The result is a feeling of inevitable introspection, sometimes accompanied by melancholy, of longing for what we don't even know what it is, of a lightness that has not yet arrived. This feeling is not a mistake, it's a break. And here comes one of the biggest keys to this phase, allowing the past to move without having to hold on to it. When Scorpio tries to control the flow of healing, he loses it, but when he surrenders, when he allows himself to be crossed by the memory without trying to manipulate its meaning, liberation happens, not as a grand event, but as an inner whisper of acceptance, as if to say, "This happened, but it no longer defines me." This is a step where you can understand more clearly which emotional patterns you inherited and which ones you are still nurturing. Sometimes what comes back is not the original pain, but the way you ended up dealing with her. And this mode, as useful as it was in the past, is now obsolete. The new phase of your cycle will not be sustained if you continue reacting with the same emotional strategies as before. It's time to update the way you respond to life's old taunts. And here is a precious detail. Most people expect the past to return clearly with obvious signs, but he doesn't always present himself that way. Often it returns as a nameless discomfort, a vague anxiety, a feeling of repeating something you don't know exactly what it is. Trust these sensations. They are spiritual data. This is information coming from the invisible layer of your existence, asking for attention. When ignored, they accumulate. When heard, they dissolve. Astrology, in this context, is not a fixed map. It is a listening instrument. She shows that cycles are not repeated to imprison, but to offer opportunity. And Scorpio, more than any other sign, knows that repetition carries the code of revelation. Nothing returns by chance. Everything that comes back carries the chance of a different answer. At this point, you don't need to force understanding, nor speed up the process. Just be present. Just take a deeper look at what is being activated. Pay attention to the meetings, the messages that arrive, the dreams that intensify. The soul does not just speak with words. It manifests itself through everything. And this cycle is opening subtle, but consistent paths for you to release what has already fulfilled its function. With that in mind, tell me, how has the past manifested itself for you at this stage? Have you noticed patterns returning, memories repeating themselves, strange dreams that seem to carry hidden messages? It is in this final stretch of the cycle that Scorpio reveals itself in its most authentic and rarest form. After going through the initial discomfort of instinct in conflict with the mission, and after being confronted by the return of emotions rooted in old pacts, a stage now arrives that is not announced with noise, but with depth. This third phase does not present itself with striking external events, but with a completely different state of internal perception. Everything that has been activated so far now finds a place of synthesis, and contrary to popular belief, true strength does not come from movement, but from inner rest. We are talking about a time when the Scorpio soul no longer needs to prove anything. You don't need to react or protect yourself. She just watches, and it is in this observation that a new type of alignment begins to happen. According to the deepest astrological traditions, when the moon reaches its last quarter, the symbolic field of the sign prepares for a kind of disintegration of the old. This is when the soul stops operating by survival and begins to operate by resonance. At this point in the cycle, Scorpio no longer moves on impulse. There is a refinement in the look, a more subtle filter between what arrives and what is absorbed. What used to hurt now only informs. What was previously seen as an attack is now understood as projection. The soul begins to see things as they are, without the emotional weight of the past and without the expectation of the future. And that, in itself, already represents an ascension, but not a triumphant rise with applause or recognition. It is a silent elevation made of invisible choices, of internal responses that do not need to be justified. This is the point in the journey where Scorpio stops being the guardian of pain and becomes the mirror of reality. He no longer reacts because he has learned that not everything is personal. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every absence is rejection. And above all, that silence carries more truth than 1,000 words spoken. At the height of emotion, this wisdom does not come from books, nor from external teachings. It comes from direct experience with one's own shadow, of intimacy built with its own abysses. And only those who have gone down there understand the value of not needing to prove anything to anyone. Many, when observing Scorpio at this stage, will not understand what has changed. They will feel something different, but they won't know how to name it, because Scorpio is no longer vibrating at the frequency of defense but of presence. It is no longer concerned with controlling but with sustaining. And that changes everything, because now it is available, not to be hurt, but to be a channel, to be a witness, to be the one who sees but does not judge, that feels but doesn't dramatize, that welcomes without absorbing. This is the true power of the sign, transforming intensity into clarity, transmute reactivity into emotional wisdom. It is in this internal space that silence becomes sacred, not as an absence of sound, but as a fullness of meaning. Silence is now no longer the hiding place of the wounded, but the altar of the awakened. It is the place where Scorpio collects its own energy and directs it with intention, with purpose, with focus. There is no more waste. There is no rush anymore. All now aligns with the time of the soul, a time that is not measured in days, but in integrations. If before life asked for courage to react, now it asks for courage to sustain. Sustain lightness after weight. Sustain the truth after the illusion. Sustaining the high frequency even when everything around seems to want to pull you back into the drama. And this support is not done with effort. It is done with choice. Daily choice to remain within yourself, to honor what has already been learned, to trust what is being built internally, even if no one is watching. And here it is important to remember, Scorpio is not going through this process alone. Even if it seems isolated, even if it is silent, there is a spiritual intelligence operating all the time. Astrological cycles are like gears that move the soul towards its point of coherence. And right now, this gear is aligning the Scorpio field with a new energetic function, a cleaner, more precise, more conscious function. It is the moment when the sign stops seeking what it already has and begins to support what the world has not yet learned to recognize, the transformative presence. This phase also awakens a more refined perception of the value of the invisible. What previously went unnoticed, a word said in a certain tone, a small gesture, a charged silence, now carries meaning. Scorpio, by opening up to this new lens, begins to understand the hidden layers of events, and this generates silent communication with life, as if the universe is saying, now that you see more clearly, you can walk more lightly. Spirituality teaches that true maturity is not in knowing everything, but in being able to be with what is, without running away, without denying, without getting distracted. And that's what Scorpio practices here. A deep, serene, and connected presence. A way of existing that does not need to be explained, because it already carries within it the vibration of authenticity. And whoever vibrates from their own essence attracts exactly what is in tune with their new state. At this point, a lot of things start to leave the field. People, ideas, old desires, patterns of behavior that no longer make sense. But unlike previous phases, this cleaning now happens effortlessly. It's as if Scorpio's energy field is more selective, more in tune, and everything that doesn't resonate simply moves away. There is no conflict. There is no fight. There is just a silent, natural, inevitable realignment. And this has a direct impact on the way Scorpio positions itself in the world. Now your words carry more weight, your gestures more intention, your gaze more presence. There is no longer any need for convincing. Whoever is on the same frequency feels it. Those who aren't there simply don't access it. And this does not generate sadness, it generates peace. Because everything is where it should be. That is the beauty of silent ascension. It doesn't attract attention, but it transforms everything it touches. It doesn't need to be explained because it is felt. And in this new state, Scorpio no longer becomes the one who seeks answers, but the one who holds the space for others to find theirs too. It is at this point that the mission reveals itself, not as something that needs to be conquered, but as something that has always been there, just waiting for the field to be ready to support it. That's why this moment cannot be rushed. The soul knows the exact time of revelation, and if everything is silent now, if nothing is happening on the outside, perhaps it is because the greatest revolution is happening on the inside. And in this process, listening is more important than action. Feeling is more valuable than knowing. Vibration speaks louder than any explanation. Have you felt this subtle shift? This moving away from the noise? This reconnection with something more internal? Have you noticed that your answers are coming from places you didn't access before? I want to know what's alive inside you right now. At certain moments in the Scorpio cycle, certain things begin to happen insistently. seemingly random situations begin to repeat themselves. More frequently, details that previously went unnoticed now gain symbolic weight. It's as if reality began to flash codes, as if the universe had stopped whispering and began to speak more clearly. And despite the subtle appearance, those who are spiritually awakened recognize when these signs stop being coincidences and become callings. Spiritual astrology notes that Scorpio is one of the archetypes most connected to transition cycles between planes. Your sensitivity isn't just emotional, it's vibrational. This means that Scorpio not only feels what is happening around them, but also captures movements that have not yet materialized. He realizes it before it happens, into it, before understanding, and for carrying such a strong connection with the invisible when, as the universe begins a new cycle of activation, Scorpio is one of the first to be touched. At this point in the cycle, what begins to manifest are not answers but clues, small interruptions in the flow of routine that serve as energetic markings. A numerical sequence that repeats itself insistently, such as 1111, 0333, 2222, often appears at specific moments of the day, generally associated with deep thoughts, existential doubts, or sensations that cannot be translated into words. These repetitions do not appear to impress or scare, but to confirm that there is a realignment underway and that your perception is being tuned to accompany this new vibrational field. Another common sign that intensifies at this stage is the presence of déjà vu, the feeling of having already experienced a certain scene, of having already heard certain words, of recognizing an environment that you have supposedly never been to. These episodes are not simple failures of the mind, but spiritual mechanisms that reveal parallel layers of consciousness. It is as if the soul is going through internal portals, accessing fragments of information from other times or realities that have something to say about the now. And even though the physical world tries to offer conventional explanations for these occurrences, the spiritual body knows. You know when something carries a meaning that goes beyond it, and it is precisely in this silent recognition that a profound activation begins. Scorpio, upon noticing these patterns, should not rush to decipher them in a hurry, but rather remain silent and observe, because often the sign is not in what appears, but in the way you react to what appears. The true answer is not outside, it vibrates within. In addition to numbers and déjà vus, another recurring phenomenon at this point in the cycle is the sudden emergence of people who have marked your trajectory in some way. They come back through messages, unexpected encounters, memories activated for no apparent reason. And it's not about nostalgia, it's about review. The universe repositions certain characters in your story not to repeat, but to conclude, so that something pending is finally understood, released, or reintegrated. These encounters also carry a specific energy, that of revelation. Sometimes, what previously seemed obscure takes on new light just with the presence of another person, and these interactions do not necessarily need to be long or intense. Sometimes a brief conversation can serve as a catalyst. The important thing is to realize that these returns are not by chance. They are part of a larger review, a karmic reconfiguration where old agreements are being reevaluated and given new meanings. At this point in the process, Scorpio begins to understand that they don't need to chase answers. They come, not as theories, but as experiences, not as ready-made certainties, but as intuitions that become so clear that it is impossible to ignore. And for this to happen fully, you need to listen. Listen to your own impulses, subtle signs, the rhythm of your own energy. The universe communicates not with shouts, but often. And the more you tune in to your truth, the more you pick up the signs along the way. Many Scorpios also report, at this stage, changes in their sleep pattern. They wake up at exact times, often between 3 and 4 in the morning, with a feeling of being watched or called. These silent dawns are not random disturbances. These are moments when the veil between the worlds becomes thinner, allowing information from the spiritual field to reach more clearly. It is a favorable time for insights, for prayers, for intuitive writing. This is not involuntary wakefulness, but a window of communication between the conscious and the unconscious. Spirituality understands these activations as invitations. These are not pressures, they are portals, and each of these portals opens differently for each person. Therefore, there is no formula, there is presence. There is attention. There is sensitivity. What matters is not the strength of the signal, but your willingness to listen to it, in letting it move something inside, in allowing him to reorganize what needs to be adjusted. And at this moment, it is also common for sudden inspirations to arise, unusual creative ideas, the desire to change something in the routine, the look, the environment. This happens because your vibrational field is being realigned, and the body, mind, and heart begin to respond to this new pulse. Scorpio is a sign that needs internal coherence. When you feel like something is out of alignment, even if you can't name it, your entire system goes into overdrive. Therefore, this phase is crucial to reevaluate what is taking up space in your field, physically, emotionally, and energetically. It's a time to realize whether the environments you frequent recharge or drain you, if the conversations you have expand or limit you, if the habits you feed bring you closer or further away from who you know it could be. And this assessment does not need external rules. It happens inside, from your vibration, from what resonates or not with what you are becoming. It is in this flow of perception that the calling happens, not as an authoritarian command, but as a gentle reminder. You are ready to go further, and that beyond is not a place. It's a state, a more refined level of connection with everything that surrounds you. A point where you stop reacting on impulse and start responding with intention, where your presence becomes your language, where your frequency becomes your signature. Have you noticed these signs around you? Does this internal invitation make sense to pay more attention to what seems small, but vibrates with intensity? I want to know how this is manifesting for you. There is a point in the cycle of spiritual evolution where intensity stops being strength and becomes weight. And Scorpio, precisely because it is the sign that dives deepest into emotions, runs the risk of transforming what it feels into a fixed identity. The intensity experienced when not transmuted becomes prison. And at this exact moment in the cycle, the astrological vibration clearly shows us where the most subtle, and also the most powerful, blockage is. It is not about an external obstacle, an external influence or imposed karma. The true limit is within, and it doesn't come from a lack of strength, but from unconscious attachment to old pain. When we talk about Scorpio, it is inevitable to remember their deep relationship with the past, not just as a memory, but as an energetic territory. Scorpio is an expert at remembering, in archiving every sensation in vivid detail. This, on the one hand, is a rare gift. It allows a precise reading of the emotional field, an innate empathy, a keen perception of other people's feelings. But on the other hand, when this emotional memory becomes a home, it imprisons. And this prison is made of invisible ropes, unresignified hurts, internal pacts based on pain, silent promises that you will never be vulnerable again. According to the deepest traditions of initiatory astrology, Scorpio is governed by a spiritual principle that only activates when there is real surrender. Strength and awareness are not enough. You need to let go. And letting go, for Scorpio, is one of the most challenging movements, because it represents giving up emotional control. As long as there is attachment to the wound, there is no space for the light to truly settle. The spiritual body continues to operate from the trauma, even if the mind has already understood the origin of the pain. This cycle, as the energy map of the period shows us, invites Scorpio to stop protecting itself from life by using pain as armor. Sorrows become shields, and shields block everything, including healing. This is where many Scorpios stagnate. They believe they are protecting themselves, when in fact they are isolating themselves from the expansion itself. They transform their traumas into existential frames, and they end up functioning emotionally from repeated narratives, even in new contexts. There is a silent belief that takes hold in these situations, that if I forget what I experienced, I will be dishonoring my pain. But what spiritual astrology proposes is something different. It's not about forgetting, nor denying. It's about removing the altar. Don't make pain a throne. Do not make the scar a symbol of permanence. True healing does not require denial of the past. It calls for release from the need to remain tied to it. When Scorpio keeps returning to the scene of pain, seeking more explanations, more meaning, more justifications, he is, in fact, feeding an emotional identity based on suffering. And there is a direct energetic consequence of this. The spiritual mission falls asleep, because mission is not a movement of pain, it's a power movement. The soul cannot express its function if the emotional body is saturated with memories that occupy all channels of perception. And this is the moment in the cycle when these internal currents begin to reveal themselves more clearly. You realize that you are trapped not by a lack of will, but by emotional patterns that have already become automatic. And the most subtle, and perhaps most dangerous, of these patterns is that of self-punishment. Scorpio, when he doesn't forgive, doesn't just hold a grudge against others, he keeps it, above all, against himself. You demand yourself, you judge yourself, you impose an almost impossible standard of emotional perfection on yourself. And when he doesn't reach this ideal, he begins to silently punish himself, refusing to be happy, to open up, to receive, as if he were saying to himself, "I can't do it yet. I don't deserve it yet." This, energetically, is a very serious blockage, because it prevents the soul from moving in the direction of what is already available. Spirituality teaches that every expansion process begins with the acceptance that it is no longer necessary to carry what was useful in another phase, but which is no longer useful today. And this transition hurts. It hurts because it affects identity. Why give up the known narrative? But it is precisely this openness that allows the new to manifest itself. While Scorpio insists on trying to understand everything from the rational mind, he sabotages his own growth movement. Because certain codes cannot be deciphered with logic, only with presence. At this point in the cycle, dreams begin to change. The signs that used to come from outside now come from within. You feel a different kind of tiredness, not physical but energetic, a desire to empty oneself, to let go, to simplify. This is the language of the spiritual field saying, let go. But letting go requires trust, confidence in what has not yet manifested itself, confidence in yourself, trust in the energy that sustains everything, even when it seems like nothing is happening. And that's when the awakened Scorpio begins to blossom, not by trying to understand every detail of your story, but by allowing the story to stop being a prison and become a bridge. What you experience no longer needs to be the center of your identity. It could just be the foundation of something much bigger, a silent foundation for a new mission that begins to emerge, but that only reveals itself when there is space to receive it. The final transformation does not happen at the height of pain. It happens in the space between what was and what is not yet, in the fertile void, in internal listening, the moment you decide to stop feeding the old versions of yourself, when you stop asking for permission to change, when you stop waiting for the perfect scenario, the ideal explanation, the clear signal, and simply choose. Now is the time to live differently. This choice does not happen all at once. It becomes consolidated in small day-to-day decisions, in the way you respond to the old pattern, in the way you look in the mirror, in the way you allow yourself to feel without losing yourself. And this, as simple as it may seem, is true Scorpio rebirth, the internal decision to no longer function from pain, the firm choice to give up control and let the energy of the soul lead. This stage requires, above all, honesty with yourself, because no one but you knows what's still stuck, what still needs to be left, what you could have already released but insist on carrying, and not as a judgment, but as an invitation to leave space for what is already trying to be born, because there is no awakened mission in an overloaded soul. Getting here was no accident. If your listening has brought you to this point in the cycle, where each word seems to pulse closer to your own silence, it is because there is something moving within you that no longer accepts being postponed. The recognition that is born now is not a label, it is not a title, it is not a role that is given to you from outside. It comes from within like a subtle confirmation of something you've always known, but until then kept, hidden perhaps for fear of seeming too much, perhaps out of habit of hiding so as not to be displeased, or perhaps because you learned that feeling deeply was a sign of weakness. But this phase of the process shows the opposite. It shows that it is exactly this capacity for emotional diving, this almost raw sensitivity, this unfiltered delivery, that makes Scorpio one of the most powerful archetypes for carrying and transmitting spiritual codes that other energies of the zodiac cannot even touch. The mark of the chosen, according to the teachings of spiritual astrology, is not a gift bestowed. It is a responsibility recognized, and recognition only happens when the pain no longer demands a stage, but rather a purpose. When suffering stops being a battle scar and becomes a language of healing. The sky at this moment signals that Scorpio energy is going through not just a lunar cycle, but a deeper cycle, one that transforms survivors into guides. This does not mean spiritual superiority, but energetic maturity. Scorpio has lived long enough in the shadows to know that light is not the absence of darkness, but awareness within it. And that is why it is one of the few signs capable of being reborn so many times without losing its essence. On the contrary, each rebirth further refines what is true. The mark is not visible, but it is felt, in those who listen more than they talk, in those who feel more than react, in those who observe beyond appearances and sustain spaces that no one notices. This mark is not a privilege, but an internal permission. It is activated when Scorpio, after the entire emotional journey, chooses to stop hiding out of fear and begins to position themselves as a channel. Not a channel to show off, but to serve, to welcome, guide, transform. Not with ready-made speeches, but with conscious presence. This final recognition does not happen because the universe chose you randomly. It happens because you can no longer deny what you feel when everything becomes silent. There is an internal vibration that pulses when you are aligned, a certainty that appears without rational explanation, one state of coherence between who you are, what you experience, and what you offer. This spiritual coherence is the true seal. It is what differentiates the healer from the one in need of attention. It is what separates silent power from emotional manipulation. And Scorpio, with its extreme nature, feels this divide more clearly than anyone. You realize that you are carrying this brand when you start to be approached by people who want to vent, ask for advice, share their pain. This doesn't happen by chance. Your energetic frequency changes and begins to attract realities that are ready to come into contact with what you represent. And what you represent is not perfection nor certainty. It is truth. The truth of your journey, your crossing, your way of dealing with the shadows without having to mask them with false positivity. Spiritual astrology teaches that there are souls whose trajectory is designed with ruptures that cannot be avoided, losses that don't make sense at the time they happen, rejections that leave a mark, pain that seems greater than the emotional structure is capable of withstanding. But all of this, when looked at with presence and courage, becomes tools for action, invisible tools that you start to carry with you, not as weights, but as instruments for reading the world. This point in the cycle, where we are now, is not for those looking for easy answers. It is for those who accept that the path to inner lucidity requires surrender. And this surrender is not always comfortable. She asks to resign, not the renunciation of oneself, but of the masks, of characters created to fit into spaces that were never theirs, of the silent pacts that kept you trapped in versions of yourself that no longer vibrate with what you have become. Scorpio carries this energy so densely because the soul that chooses to be born under this sign accepts, even before incarnating, a commitment to transmutation. This does not mean that everything will be pain, but that pain will have a function. Nothing in Scorpio is superfluous. No emotion is free. Each fragment of your journey was in some way part of your spiritual polishing process. And now at this stage of the journey you have the chance to look at everything you have experienced with a different eye, a less injured and more awake look, less needy and more present, less defensive and more available. This recognition does not depend on external validation. It flourishes in silence, in the inner listening that says, now you can walk from another place, no longer reacting to what was, but creating what will be, no longer trying to protect what has passed, but making space for what doesn't even have shape yet. It is this availability for the unknown that activates the mission field, because mission is not something you will pursue. It is something that emerges when you are aligned enough to realize that your own story already contains everything you need to teach. And teaching here is not an academic role. It is a vibration that guides. It is an energetic field that organizes. It is a presence that inspires by example, not by speech. When you choose to remain true, even when it costs you relationships, spaces, and habits, you are telling the universe that you no longer need to be saved. You are now part of the force that sustains others, and that choice changes everything. If your journey so far has been marked by ruptures, don't take it as punishment. See how to cut. If the relationships that marked you the most were also the ones that hurt you the most, notice what they taught about limits, about self-love, about conscious surrender. If the situations that challenged you the most still echo in your memory, notice how you are no longer the same person who experienced it. There is growth where before there was only pain. There is wisdom where before there was only confusion. There is power where before there was only tiredness. If you got here, it wasn't by chance. This already says a lot about your connection with this content and with your own process. So, if this message touched something in you, I now invite you to subscribe to the channel, not only so you don't miss the next videos, but to continue this journey of expansion with awareness, truth, and depth. Leave a like if this video made sense to you. This helps spread this message to more people who are also on this path of awakening. And before leaving, take a look at the video that appears on the left side of the screen. It is the continuation of this walk and could bring you exactly the next key you are looking for. I'll meet you there.